Hey everyone, this is Brittany. I'm licensed clinical marriage and family therapist. And today we're going to be talking about the basics of trauma-informed care. So I will share my screen with you. There we go. Okay. Trauma-informed care, what is it? Well, there are several different ways that we can look at trauma-informed care. In this presentation, we're going to be looking at whether it is a clinical aspect and how trauma impacts different people and also organizations. So how trauma might impact your organization that you work at and what that might look like. So let's go ahead and define trauma. Trauma, for the sake of this presentation, trauma is defined as any event or experience that overwhelms a person's internal or external resources, which internal resources might be any kind of resiliency, how you kind of bounce back from different situations. External resources might be the support system that you lean on, family, friends, your community. So it overwhelms all of those resources, leaving you feeling hopeless, powerless, or powerless and hopeless, as it says in the presentation. So trauma, there are big T traumas and there are little T traumas. So a big T trauma might be an event that happens one time, or a situation where you feel like your life is put in immediate danger. So this, usually when we talk about trauma, a lot of people think veterans on the battlefield, right? So where their life is put in immediate danger, where they might be shot at and experience some really intense experiences where they feel like their life is in danger. And then there are little T traumas, which this is the way you kind of think about traumatic stress, and what also might be called like death by 1,000 paper cuts. So it's a situation that happens again and again and again and again. Not to say that those situations are not intense or make somebody feel like their life is in danger, but it's really a traumatically stressful experience that you experience over and over and over again. And it can actually result in complex PTSD. So what does trauma look like? Well, this is the bullseye that we're going to be looking at now. So if you think about in a clinical situation, if you're a therapist and you work with different clients, you might notice, or let's say you're a teacher that works with students, and any of the people that you're working with have different diagnoses. So the problem is kind of in the middle there. You might notice that like let's just say you're a teacher working with students, that your students have different diagnoses. So they might have ADHD, PTSD, OCD, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, which is a big one with children, depression, anxiety, etc. If you're looking at an organizational structure, those problems might be changes in structure. So maybe people have moved around a lot in administration. There are expected layoffs where people are just gone and you didn't know why they left. There might have been a lack of communication and many different other things. So that's kind of the difference between how trauma impacts different people and how trauma impacts different organizations. So we're just looking at the problems and then considering what kind of behaviors might you see that people or organizations might have due to those problems. So if we're thinking about those children again that were diagnosed with ADD, ODD, PTSD, any of those kinds of things, the behaviors that you might notice, you might be seeing that they're sleeping or eating too much, they're or too little. They might be isolating from others. They might be yelling a lot. They might have self-harm behaviors. They might be raging, or they might be numbing out. So you might notice that kids are daydreaming a lot. There's a lot of dissociation happening. There's all these behaviors that come out of these problems, right? And then if it's an organization that had some of those problems, you might notice that the behaviors of the employees are that you see a lot of closed doors. So if there's offices, people are closing their doors a lot. They're not interacting as much. You might see a higher employee turnover rate, people using PTO a lot more. They're just not wanting to come into work and other things. So how do these people with these problems and these behaviors tend to feel? So whether that's clinical or organizational, you might notice that those behaviors are sadness, rage, depression, loneliness, dissociation, any of these kind of feelings that people have because of the behaviors, these feelings come out of them. So when you consider these people with these problems, how do others tend to respond to them? So let's think about those children again. Children that are in the classroom that have acting out behaviors, they're yelling, they're fighting, they're biting, they might be cussing, yelling. Think about these teenagers that often get labeled as rebellious, bad teens. They have all of these different behaviors. They might get labeled. Often kids get labeled by teachers and by parents, the adults in their lives, as bad, rebellious, crazy. People try to ignore them. They try to control them with either medications or restraint, yell at them, rage at them, any of those kinds of things. If somebody has behaviors and they're in an organization, how might the administration come down and try to handle those people? You might notice more firing, more laying off, controlling through restricting them, cutting their hours, cutting their time, cutting their access to other people. And so usually there's this controlling that tries to happen when people are acting out. And then if you consider, if we're trying to control somebody that has these kind of behaviors by restraining them, yelling at them, medicating them, calling them names, labeling them, any of that kind of stuff, then what is the response usually from those people? The response is usually just more of the same, amped up behaviors. So you continue to see more of that acting out behavior. Think of the teenager that has been labeled as bad, that has been restrained, medicated, any of those things. Excuse me. And then how do they respond? They usually just get even more so, right? Even angrier. They don't feel heard. They feel dismissed. They don't feel validated. And so these behaviors just continue to increase. So here is the shift in trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care says what we really need to do is look at the middle bubble there that says problems, that purple circle. What we want to do is change it to trauma. Because you consider that if there has been trauma going on in the lives of children that you might not know about, then any kind of trauma, if we take like the examples of the children that we were talking about, if they have abuse or neglect going on in the home that you can't see, if they have controlling environments, if they are lacking appreciation or compassion or attunement, they don't feel like they're being heard and seen either by their caretakers or any of the adults around them. They have some kind of serious trauma, something that they have gone through that has been hard for them and overwhelmed their resources, right? How does that change how you think about these people? Well, typically what happens is if we change that middle bubble, here it still says problems, but if you change it to thinking about trauma, typically what happens is when we look at these children that have these acting out behaviors, these children that we've labeled as bad and acting out and rebellious, that if we consider that there's been something deeper underneath the surface that has caused them to act that way, then typically what happens is it softens us. We have more compassion, more empathy. We're able to listen and attune to them and say, what is really going on? It changes the question from what is wrong with you to what happened to you? What's going on underneath that behavior that I might be able to sit with and try to empathize a little bit more and get to the emotion that's underneath this behavior, right? So it changes how we think about these people. When we offer more compassion, more empathy, more kindness, what is the response from them? And I've worked with children so long to know that it absolutely makes a difference. That if I shift how I'm thinking about my clients, In an organization that I'm a part of, if I think about any of the employees that are locking their doors, shutting their doors, and not wanting to come out, if I reframe how I'm thinking about behavior, and I shift my response to being more empathetic and more attuned, typically the response I get is that they open up, even if it's just a little bit. They try to open up just a little more trust, a little more peace, a little more calm, and to be able to try to create at least a little bit of ground there where some psychological safety might be built. That is the whole point. So what changed? It was us, right? Those of us who are on the outside and who are the clinicians, the teachers, the first responders. I've done this many times with law enforcement. If it is bosses, principals, anybody who has who is in this in these power differentials that has a bit more power, if we can understand that how we need to respond, that is all where it starts. Recognizing that these acting out behaviors as possible reactions to trauma, right? Instead of just, you're a bad person, there's something wrong with you. It's your diagnosis, it's your attitude, it's your personality that I don't like. You have a problem. There's something wrong with you. Shifting it just a little bit more. Girls, hey, girls. Sorry, I apologize for the dogs. Hey, come lay down. Come here, come. Hush, go lay down. Hush. Okay. The other thing is that you don't have to be a therapist to act therapeutically. There's this thing called the universal mindset, right? Which is that we act as if trauma is always a response. So the other part of this is that you don't have to be a therapist to act therapeutically. It's recognizing that we don't understand what kind of experiences and situations people have been involved with. We don't know what kind of life they're living behind the scenes. We don't know what is creating this kind of acting out behaviors or these behaviors that we don't like. We don't know what that's coming from. So we do this universal kindness, this unconditional positive regard towards people, which is we're going to extend empathy and understand that maybe your behavior that I'm seeing right now might be the source of something deeper. And I would love to hear that story. I'd love to hear what's going on with you. So it just takes a moment to kind of step down and attune with people. All right. There are guiding principles of trauma-informed care, and there are 6 of them. The first is safety. This is physical and psychological safety. So you consider, if you're, let's say you're a therapist, when I have people come into my room, I offer them many different options of where to sit. Of just giving them one option might not feel safe for them. Is there somebody behind me? Is the door behind me? I kind of want to know, I need to be able to see the door. I need to be able to see my exits. This feels too close. I don't like this. So maybe they can move their chair away. But just recognizing that people need to feel physically and psychologically safe in their environments. For children in the classroom, this is really important. So we give them, desks that they sit at, but perhaps the person that we set them by does not make them feel psychologically safe. So they're probably not going to do the best kind of work that they can do. So it's just being mindful of how you can create a physical and psychologically safe environment, especially for, let's say, in the workplace. I was once part of an organization where they took everybody's doors away. It just became this open concept floor plan because they wanted to get people talking and to share these different ideas. But for somebody like me who has had trauma and who is more of an introvert, that did not feel psychologically safe at all. As soon as they took away the doors and they took away my ability to kind of get away, I didn't last there much longer because that they had taken away my psychological safety. And as much as I tried to explain that and say, I really need to come up with a different working situation, and I wasn't heard, then that just kind of ended it for me. So again, it's about psychological and physical safety of your employees and everyone that you have under working with you. Trustworthiness and transparency. So being able to be a trustworthy and transparent person. If you're a therapist, this is having access, like giving your clients access to any records, any notes, any diagnoses that you've given them, discussing that with them. If you have to make a report on somebody, I've had to do this many times. And I always say, listen, if I have to make a report, I'm always going to sit down with you and we're going to talk about this before I ever have to do it, because I don't want you to feel blindsided and have the Child and Family Services show up at your door or something, or to feel blindsided, because this is about your journey. And so I want to make sure that you can trust me. If this is an organization, it's about being transparent with financials and with where the company is headed, the future and the direction. All of those things need to be really transparent so that people know that they can trust you, and that there's not all this shady stuff going on behind the scenes. Because if there is, then you're not going to be able to develop that trust that is needed. Peer support is super important. This is about peers supporting one another. So I also did some work around peer support training when I worked at a university at one time. We did a lot of this. So it's recognizing that the people that you're working with need to hear from themselves, from their own consumers, right? So what that might mean is, let's say that you're actually a teacher in the classroom and you're going to want to make some rules and guidelines for the classroom. Well, who's going to be the best people to create those rules? Probably the students. If it's just coming from you, then they're probably not going to be as apt to following the rules. But if they can all together and collectively with you helping to say, let's peer support one another and decide what is going to be the best, healthiest environment for our classroom. What kind of rules do we want to see implemented? And that's the same for any for an organization that's trying to establish this. As far as client work, when I work with clients, I always say this is your journey. So what kind of goals do you want to establish? What does your training plan look like? I can help to make that happen, but you're really going to be the one to guide and direct this entire thing. And that leads right into collaboration and mutuality. So we are collaborating together. There's this mutual sharing of power, in that yes, there are power dynamics, but I'm not the only one holding power. I'm going to continually be giving it back to you. Empowerment, voice, and choice, same thing, right? Very similar. There's this whole aspect of building safety in these relationships. I want to hear your voice. I'm going to give you choice in the direction that we're headed. I did this with my own children growing up. I would always give them different options, right? So I want to hear your voice. What do you think we should do about this decision? You made this poor choice, and now we're going to have to talk about consequences. What do you think should happen? What do you think is going to be the best thing in the next few days to help you learn the situation that you don't make this mistake again? So it's about giving them, again, voice and choice. And then cultural, historical, and gender issues, super important all across the board. It's recognizing that there is cultural, historical, and gender trauma that is deeply rooted in our society. In any country that we're a part of, there's history there. In the United States, and then you break it down into different places across the United States, and then you zone in a little bit more to urban, no matter where you are, male, female, anyone in the the LGBTQ plus community, that there's this history of trauma that can be there. And we have to be mindful of it and honor it and not be afraid of it, but say, listen, we recognize that there's some cultural history and some cultural trauma here that we need to be sensitive about. In the organization, especially in different schools, definitely have to be mindful of that and recognize how those power differentials play out, recognizing that there is probably some cultural and historical trauma there. All right. So that's the end. If you have any questions, these are just a couple places where you can find me. That's my website. You can also find me on Facebook. I appreciate you joining me. And again, reach out if you have any questions. If I can offer any more, feel free to rate and review this training. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.